The approved candidate is Nate Blouin. When reviewing candidates, this is the criteria I use. Good candidates will have several of these policies listed on their campaign website. The more, the better. Great candidates will discuss these policies nonstop at town halls and other local events with constituents and during interviews. These candidates are the ones most deserving of the spotlight and your vote. Any candidate endorsed by one or more of the trusted political groups also helps strengthen their case for approval. The more groups that consolidate around a progressive leader, the more likely their campaign can win the primary in a crowded field. Take Chris Rabb, for example, a great candidate who won recently in Pennsylvania's 3rd District, or Adam Hemingway in New Jersey's 12th. In Utah's 1st, as mentioned, 3 candidates meet the approval criteria based on their campaign's policy platforms. They all support Medicare for All and a variety of other important progressive policies. Of these 3, Nate Blouin, a current state senator, has the most endorsements by these trusted groups. At the time of this recording, the 3 groups are Leaders We Deserve, Our Revolution, and Track APAC. One of the other progressives, Liban Mohamed, is endorsed by Citizens Impeachment. Sadly, another race where I find myself disagreeing with them. And the 3rd progressive has none. In the case of Farrell, he has a progressive policy page, but not much else going for him. I noticed Nate Blouin's campaign early in the 2026 election cycle. While balancing work at the state senate, he has been actively campaigning and sharing his message through social media and various interviews. While I find Nate Blouin to be the better candidate of the 4 running in this district, the other 2 progressives in this race, just by them being there at this late stage, will split the progressive base. There is a local media source in Utah called KUER, or however it's pronounced, but they did interviews with all 4 candidates, and I'll provide links to these articles, the debate, and other discussed references in the video description. Michael Farrell is a tax attorney, and Liban Mohamed is a younger candidate who did public policy work at the American Heart Association, Meta, and TikTok. These might not be terrible candidates or even terrible people, but only one candidate is going to advance to the general election. And again, there won't be a runoff election. The candidate with the most votes will win. Now, Nate did take the initiative and showed leadership on this problem by stating the reality of this, going as far to say he would exit the race if the polling showed him behind one of the other 2 progressives. Now, there are some problems with how Nate went about this. It was done last minute. Farrell nor Mohamed didn't have any interest in cooperating. In Liban Mohamed's case, one of his reasons for staying in the race, and something he also heavily leaned on during the recent debate between the 4 candidates, was his win in the April 25th nominating convention. Utah is among several states that have convention processes in their elections, sometimes also referred to as caucuses. During the nominating convention on April 25th, Liban Mohamed did win. While the specifics aren't shown here on Ballotpedia, the KUER article with Mohamed states he won with 51.5% of the vote after 5 ranked choice rounds. While this process is an additional way for candidates to make the primary ballot, the convention is not the primary election. Nate Blouin, Michael Farrell, and the establishment candidate Ben McAdams still collected the required number of signatures to make the June 23rd ballot. Now, on one hand, that is something for Liban to be proud of as a candidate. But here's the problem. Conventions and caucuses have far less voter participation than even the primary elections have, which is already a low amount to start with. Rules will vary between states and localities, but registered party members must have the free time to attend these meetings for several hours. This outdated process is just simply not accessible to a majority of voters, making it an inaccurate representation of the larger voting population. Going back to the idea of Nate Blouin's poll, one important thing to consider is his campaign had either commissioned the poll or did it themselves. I don't know all the details of how the poll was conducted or who did it or any of the other specifics, but it also looks like Nate Blouin has more information about the poll on his campaign website if you want to look into it more. Regardless, all those points are all fair criticisms to keep in mind when looking at the results. Additionally, Blouin was asked about bias in polling, such as the advantages of name recognition. In short, and because of the largely uninformed U.S. populace, that is just how polling and elections sadly work. Nate responded by saying if you don't have that name ID going into the poll, and you're worried about that, then you should be very worried about your chances in an election. As he shows on his social media account here on June 1st, the results of his poll conducted show the establishment candidate at 37%, Nate at 27%, the other 2 progressives splitting a combined 20%, and a remaining of 18% undecided voters. If Liban and Michael actually care about the progressive values they speak about, they would want to work with Nate and rally behind his campaign to defeat McAdams, an uninspiring candidate who only supports a public option and protecting corporate profits. The people of Utah's 1st District can do better, but only if they rally behind Nate Blouin. When reviewing campaigns, another area to consider is the money. While fundraising isn't the only factor of a viable campaign, it's still necessary in our shitty campaign finance system. Of the 3 progressives, Nate is the best financed. A winning campaign requires more than a good policy page online. You need the ability to organize volunteers on the ground, and that still requires resources. Nate has the policy, the endorsements, the name recognition, and the ability to run a successful campaign. Meanwhile, the other 2 candidates, as shown by the poll, are barely known with little support. The longer Liban and Michael stay in the race, despite any good intentions they might have had originally, they will only become useful idiots to the establishment Epstein class. We've already seen this play out earlier this year in Illinois. Alleged progressives Bushra Amawala and Mike Simmons. They stayed in their race despite several polls showing that they were in single digits and that Kadab Ghazaleh was within the margin of error of winning the race. Towards the end, AIPAC was spending money supporting Bushra for the sole purpose of splitting the progressive vote. Due to the narcissistic egos and poor understanding of math, Kat lost to BIS by 4,000 votes, despite the 15,000 votes that ended up being split between Mike and Bushra. And look, to be clear, I'm not saying votes are owned by any one candidate, but if we're ever going to get progressive policies enacted, we need to be tactful about this. Now here in Utah's 1st District, we very well could see a similar result. It's technically not too late for other progressives to unofficially withdraw and endorse Nate. However, it is too late for their names to be removed from the ballot. I doubt we will see these candidates strategically support Nate. Progressive policies will never happen if narcissistic and egotistical candidates continue to help the corrupt status quo defeat a fellow progressive. Whether it's their intention to split the vote, or they just incorrectly think that they will be the winning candidate, the end result is the same and we all lose. This means it's up to the voters to rally around Nate Blouin if they want a real progressive leader to send to Congress. Now you can take my word for it, but as I say, these videos should only be a component of your research. I mentioned how these 4 candidates were together on a debate stage recently. It's my opinion Nate did the best, but I'm also biased as he is the secular lefty approved candidate. If you want to watch the full debate and judge for yourself, it will be linked below. Additionally, I will also link an interview that Nate Blouin has done. He was on with Francesca Fiorentini in her Candidate Corner series. Highly recommend you check that out and all the other good work she does on her channel, the Bitchuation Room. Unfortunately, Nate is the only approved candidate running in Utah. I hope voters rally around him to win his primary. If he doesn't, there are also 2 other things to consider. The first is the establishment candidate is not going to fight to improve lives by any meaningful way. Second, if the Utah legislator and governor try to switch maps again last minute, Nate Blouin is a candidate that could still inspire more voters to win, even in the case of a gerrymandered map. The establishment candidate would have 0 chance in that scenario. So voters in Utah's 1st, vote for Nate Blouin.